chairman of the National Education Policy Draft 2019, Dr. K Kasturirangan, says the three-language policy is here to stay and political parties must know that these are just suggestions. I and my colleague Pallav Babla caught up with him just a short while ago. Let's listen in. One particular proposal has been a subject matter of huge political debate, particularly in the state of Tamil Nadu. I'm sure you're aware you have also revised or amended the draft policy. First of all, I want to know at this moment, does the NEP 2019 propose Hindi as a mandatory language or not? Because that is the crux of all the agitation that is taking place. Has Hindi been proposed as a mandatory language or not?
My answer is no.
So why this noise and why this hullabaloo?
Would you like to have an elaboration on that?
Yes,
I can
absolutely.
give you more of it.
Absolutely,
but I
Dr.
can say this one word speaks volumes of what is the reaction from me.
Dr. Kasturirangan, the reason why we would want you to elaborate, because that paragraph, that contentious paragraph, and I have it right, is P5.4.9, which was later revised also. It led, many people would say, it led to a lot of confusion. So earlier on, it mentioned Hindi as a mandatory language, and then later in the amendment, there was no mention at all, thus creating more confusion. So we would love you to elaborate.
Okay. I will clarify that. I'll do that. First thing I would like to say is that we have the section on the language policy, which is a very comprehensive one. It is not only addressing with respect to the three-language formula or the medium of instruction. On this particular aspect, we have addressed the question with respect to the earlier language policies, because we knew that language is a sensitive issue. If there is some level of acceptability of a particular formula or a strategy, we didn't want to rock the boat. So that was very clear to us. So we had this three-language formula. We went through the three-language formula and this utility and its performance, and in the overall context of its acceptability at the country's level, even though definitely there will be small deviations in the adoption of this three-language formula with different states, it's certainly there. So, but we thought as a general approach, as a general recommendation of the policy for the policy of language, we recommended a three-language formula. The second thing, the modification that we brought is, if you really look at the 1968 language formula, it made Hindi mandatory for South Indian states. In fact, they have made it clear that besides the North Indian states learning English, Hindi, say Sanskrit, the non-English speaking areas will have, besides English and the local language, also Hindi to be learned. So that was the thing, and it was carried forward by 1986 policy as well as the 1992 improvement of the 1986 policy. So one of the major changes that we have made in the present policy relates to the fact that there shall be flexibility even for that, and whereas the three-language formula will be certainly adopted, the adoptability of the three-language formula doesn't impose Hindi as a language on any state in this country.
Dr. Kasturirangan, okay, Dr. Kasturirangan, Pallav, please go ahead.
Dr. Rangan, there is a feeling, we worked together for a very long time. I know you're not easy to bend, you're not easy to change things and amend things easily. Were you under some kind of a pressure to make this particular amendment a draft to the draft?
Nothing. In the morning you get up and you find that some of the states in the southern India and other places, we are finding there is a tremendous resentment. I've called some of my very, very valued colleagues, very competent colleagues. We sit together, we debate this, what we should do. They are all members of this committee and also the people who supported this committee. And we discussed the strategy for it, and we thought that we should invoke the alternate version that we have, on which we have the approval, and we simply decided that in order to make sure that our signal is right at that particular point, which is not too late. After all, 48 hours since something has been residing in the website, if you want to put a right one so that you get the right signal, we decided to go ahead with it. It is our decision, our formulation, which has been earlier approved, and there is no pressure and nobody even called us on phone to tell you that there is a problem.
Okay,
there.
but I want to ask you this
from
question.
Newspapers and other kinds of
Dr. Kasturirangan,
like
the speculation in Tamil Nadu, politically, obviously political in nature, is that you were pressurized in the first place to mention Hindi. See, Pallav asked you a question about pressure to remove the clause. I am saying the pressure to put the clause in the first place.
I say categorically, I told you the procedure we adopted to replace it. I say categorically no to the point that you are trying to say could have happened. It's not there.
Dr. Kasturirangan, how would you handle the controversy? You know, let me be specific why I ask you this question. Because parties like the DMK, ADMK, largely parties from the south, not just Tamil Nadu, even other political parties, they say they don't have a problem with just the Hindi clause, but the fact that the three-language policy itself exists in the national education policy. The DMK goes on to say, scrap the three-language policy.
Well, you know, we have reviewed, we went considerable depth with respect to what kind of policy we should adopt and recommend. We find that to have an alternate to a three-language formula earlier, except that giving the flexibility which was not existing in the earlier formula, we may not be able to do anything better. We can certainly say two language is good enough. The current strategy for going for a three-language is we understand the cognitive science and the ability to pick up new languages by the youngsters between the age of 3 and 8. We know it much better than what at the time when the kind of thoughts were given, the earlier policy. We certainly have to make use of those neural science developments, cognitive science development, and this three-language formula is the minimum. It certainly provides the basis for the youngster to pick up even more languages in the years to come. This 3 to 8 years is a very critical thing. Catch hold of that particular window and make sure that the children are taught maximum number of languages.
No, but Dr. Kasturirangan, you know, as a general, let me ask you this question.
Up to them. But equally importantly, what you can comprehend even more number of languages later, you are equipping them. Why not?
Dr. Rangan, अगर मैं आपसे पूछ सकूं, आप ये जो पॉलिसी है, इससे आप खुश हैं कि नहीं जो आपने इस वक्त ड्राफ्ट पॉलिसी हिंदुस्तान को दी है?
Dr. Rangan, so much Hindi is being spoken about in and around this policy.
Yeah.
How's your Hindi?
अच्छा,
सर आप खुश हैं इससे?
जब पल्लव से बात करना है तो हो सकता हूँ मैं रामपुरील से भी कर सकता हूँ, मैं तो काफी बात किया है उनसे, but I don't know whether I am sending the right signals or not. That I can't say.
नहीं, बट हिंदी तो आप बोलते हैं अच्छी.
बताइए.
नहीं, मैं कह रहा हूं आप खुश हैं पॉलिसी से जो आपने इस वक्त पब्लिक डोमेन में डाली है?
इंग्लिश है, आपसे बहुत खुश हूं, because you should read, the ones who have read this particular policy in its totality, just look at Hindu article today. I am sure that you are going to do quite a number of sequence of items in this, and there are many channels waiting to hear the totality of policy and its implication. And it's one of the very comprehensive. This is I should not try to gloat on this kind of a policy, being the chairman of a committee which has formulated it, but I hear it from many quarters. The quarters which I value because of their intellectual ability and the type of educational background they have. I have no reason to worry at all about the quality of the, and I should say also, because you have been often asking whether there has been this pressure and that pressure, I think this is a policy which has been conceptualized, which has been analyzed, and which has been properly then ultimately put together in the form of this kind of a document. And this is all the work of this committee, a very eminent committee with people like Manjul Bhargav, a field medalist from Princeton University, and many others.
Dr. Rangan, do you see you are known as the rocket scientist and the satellite man of India? Do you think social change, getting social change done, is harder than rocket science?
Yes, I felt so. I felt so. The number of dimensions you have to address in the case of rocket science, I think pales into, don't want to say simple or something. I think in terms of complexity is at much lower level than dealing with a complexity of this type. A successful flight of a rocket will not be immediately subjected to a national debate. You can see the kind of reaction. This is
Very
a
honest
vibrant
of him.
society. You should know India. It's a complex society, vibrant, and obviously people would. Everyone is dissecting it. Every word, every page, every para, every line as it happened just now. I think that is the vibrancy, and that is precisely what we should expect, because more people are going to read it. More people are trying to interpret it, and more people certainly are going to appreciate it, and at the same time we should have the criticism that we justly deserve. I think otherwise, if there is no fun in trying to create this kind of a complex activity in the form of a policy, if we don't have that kind of criticism.
So, Dr.
And to
Kasturirangan,
me, the criticism, a constructive criticism, that's all I want to say.
would you, Dr.
is equally
Kasturirangan,
important.
as we end this interview, I want to ask you, do you think social change is the new rocket science in your life and otherwise?
Yes, I have gone through transformation. Pallav, you know me from the days of rockets and satellites to the days in which I worked in the parliament, to the days in which I worked with the planning commission, and the days in which I have been out of all these and now got into the public, this kind of a policy related to the education. But I think each one of I should say, in one sense, I was building upon the knowledge of the and the experience of the previous level in trying to do a new job. And I also feel every time in retrospect, when I complete a job, that was much more complex than the previous one. And the engineering, this policy of education is no different in that particular order of complexity priorities in my way of doing things over the last 50 years.
All right, you heard Dr. Kasturirangan there, who says that bringing about social change is actually the new rocket science. This is actually rocket science. Let me quickly introduce our guest this evening. N. Ram, the chairman of the Hindu Publishing Group, is with us. Dr. Kasturirangan mentioned your newspaper as well, Mr. N. Ram, so I'm going to begin with you. Let me quickly introduce the others also. Manu Sundaram of the DMK is with us, Vivek Reddy, leader of the BJP, and we also have AIA DMK supporter S. Muralidharan with us. Mr. Ram, the complexity, given that this is a mammoth task to upgrade the education system of this country, do you think this entailed taking certain tough decisions which Kasturirangan proposed, and this controversy was bound to happen?
Yes, it was a pretty good-humored chat with Kasturirangan, for whom I have a lot of regard. And he tried his best to sort of explain away the problems, let's put it mildly. The problem here is they worked within the confines of a policy which I think was all wrong. The Constitution says Hindi is the official language. Prime Minister Nehru, in an act of statesmanship in 1959, as the Hindu editorial points out, made a good intervention saying English should continue to be an associate language as long as states, other states wanted it to be, particularly non-Hindi states. They went back on it, and there was an anti-Hindi agitation when I was in college. It raged at its height. The policy is a problem because there is still a feeling of Hindi hegemony. I'm far from not liking Hindi or having any hostility. I don't know Hindi myself. I can read script because I learned some Sanskrit. But I don't know Hindi. I don't really follow it because I went to for my education at that time when it was almost impossible for anyone to want to study Hindi or even be able to. Anyway, the policy is wrong because it is a policy of imposition to make it mandatory. Let people learn any language under the sun, 2, 3, 4 languages. I don't believe 3 languages should be made compulsory, by the way. It's not, you shouldn't force students to do it. 2 would be plenty, your mother tongue, and preferably English because it connects with the globe of the world and is also a link language. But periodic, so Kasturirangan's exercise, his committee's exercise was within the confines, I would say within the straitjacket of this 3-language policy, the unavoidable element there being Hindi, and the drafts I think fiddled with it, but it's good that they backed off from that.
Mr. Ram,
not giving the impression now that Hindi is being imposed. But
yes.
Interestingly, The other point I just want to say, I won't go on much longer later.
Sure.
I think all major languages are equal or national languages. That is the democratic position. And that's why I oppose this hegemony of one particular language, even if it's spoken by the largest number of Indians. No, forget the dialects and so on. Hindi taken as one language, although that's not strictly true. But all languages should be treated as equal. All major languages, I mean. And Tamil, which is my mother tongue, is a classical language. It's clearly established. It goes back to very ancient times. The script came into being at least in the Maurya period, the Tamil Brahmi script, the first written Tamil. So have some respect for that. And Mr. Stalin's suggestion or demand that if you must make Tamil mandatory in all central government offices in Tamil Nadu is a sort of response. Is an interesting and reasonable response to the demand from those guys that everybody should learn Hindi wherever you are. So I think that's my position. Treat all languages as equal.
No, that's true, Mr.
Hindi.
Ram. But do you see that you can't hit back on imposition with imposition? The feeling over here is that this hostility may have been politically manufactured. I'm just reflecting a viewpoint. It is also a fact that a large number of Tamilians are trying to learn Hindi for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. Leave them to their own resources, and you will find there is no hostility to Hindi because it's useful. Who doesn't want to learn another language, whether it is Malayalam or in the south or Telugu or Kannada? These are great languages, and Hindi is a great language. But the moment you try to impose one saying, "I'm first, I'm the top dog among Indian languages," you get into trouble. That's the lesson Jawaharlal Nehru learnt. That's the lesson many others don't. And the Hindi walas, as they are known here, they're not one block, need to learn that lesson. And it's good. I welcome the government's, clearly the government's influence was at play, whatever Dr. Kasturirangan
No, I want to ask this question. You have mentioned this fact 3 times. You have referred to him perhaps being working under some political confines 3 times. You actually feel that this was the government drafting the report?
No, not political confines.
Then?
Came from the constitution and from long-term policy, not just short-term political confines.
No, Mr. Ram, this policy has existed since 1968.
Yes, from time to time, the Hindi walas or those who are, let's say, chauvinists among them, try to whip it up. And I welcome Dr. Kasturirangan's response. He's not doggedly or dogmatically wedded to the idea that Hindi is a must in the 3-language formula. I go further and say there's no need for the 3-language formula. But that is the confines within which this committee worked. The 3-language formula is the original mistake.
And he stands by the 3-language formula.
No, he has to. No? That's his terms of reference.
Okay.
Unless he was a dissenter, the chair dissenting from this.
Okay. Mr. N. Ram, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views. That was N. Ram, the chairman of the Hindu Publishing Group. His newspaper was also mentioned by Dr. K Kasturirangan. Let me now quickly introduce Vivek Reddy, S. Muralidharan and Manu Sundaram into this debate. Sorry, gentlemen, for keeping you waiting. Vivek Reddy, you go first. When you hear this interview, let me just ask this question to, if you allow me, to Manu Sundaram. Manu, your entire fear was that Hindi is being imposed. But Dr. Kasturirangan says, no, that's not true. Number one, you have to realize this is a draft. A draft is subject to being questioned.
The questions that we have been raising are in relation to this draft, and I'm glad you acknowledge that the draft can be questioned. Secondly, with due respect to Mr. Kasturirangan and his views, I don't quite understand why the draft was subsequently withdrawn or revised if it did not have an element of imposition in the first place. So clearly, there is a contradiction in what Dr. Kasturirangan has just told us. Be that as it may, we have made it very clear that the DMK's position on this issue has been that we are not against Hindi or Urdu or Bengali. We are against the fact that an imposition of any language, and in this case Hindi, poses a serious, present and dangerous threat to the unity of the country.
So you're saying
this is something that we have over.
You're saying that you blew the pressure
go
cooker
on.
whistle just in time.
The pressure cooker blows its own whistle when sufficient pressure adds up. And to Ms. Dr. Kasturirangan's explanation that this policy has been in vogue since 1986, which is when the new education policy was actually first put forth, it is partly true that there was an element of a three-language policy for a while, but never has it been imposed. And the assurance given by the previous governments of India that there will be no imposition of Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states without their consent is what we have insisted. And secondly, may I put this for your consideration, Sanket, that if you look at Dr. R.P. Nishank, our present Union Minister for Human Resource Development, he has held his position since August at least, where he has tweeted on 1st August 2017 that Hindi must be made a national language. Now, I don't need to point this out to you or anybody else on this panel that that is exactly not the case.
Okay,
and
okay.
the Constitution
One moment.
forbids
Let me go to
a
Vivek
national
Reddy now.
language.
Vivek Reddy now. Vivek Reddy, do you see the fear over here is that there are people sitting at the helm, and now this gentleman that Manu was talking about is the Human Resource Development Minister, who carry a philosophy in their mind. And when you keep that or juxtapose that philosophy with the draft policy, this leads to fear.
Well, Sanket, I think there is no necessity of any such fear, because the government has clarified, the secretary to the education, the HRD department has clarified very clearly that there will be no imposition, and this is the official stand of the government. But what I'd like to take from Mr. N. Ram, Kasturirangan and Mr. Muralidharan's views are that if this policy has existed since 1968 and post UPAs and post NDAs, this policy has not been imposed by anybody, and the previous governments have assured that it will not be imposed, and this government is also assuring that it will not be imposed, then where is the question of the cooker gaining pressure, or where is the question of politically contriving a controversy in order to rake up political dividends? Now this is made very clear that we will not impose it. It is still at a recommendatory stage. Mr. Kasturirangan's view presents
Vivek Reddy,
one
then in that
issue,
case,
a
I
scientific
want to question
that
you
if you inculcate
on the very need of writing this in the policy. I mean, will we continuously see this being mentioned, just mentioned in the policy? Since 1968, is it now a prerequisite
Well, Sanket,
that this must
Well,
be
Sanket,
mentioned, however
yes.
it won't be implemented?
well,
Even that
Sanket,
is
if
wrong.
the policy says, if the policy says, no, what has happened is this. It has been implemented in different formats in different parts of India and in different parts of the vernacular regions. For example, in Karnataka you find, or in Andhra or some other places, you find partial implementation or no implementation. But in Tamil Nadu you find no implementation. Well, it has been left to the voluntary susceptibilities of the state
And you're saying that this is going to remain
whether they
even-
want to invoke it or
So
not.
you're saying that this is going to retain.
Well,
this basic
I think the
system will
government
retain
has said,
even if
the
it is
government has
adopted.
said one thing.
Yeah.
No, government has only said one thing. There will be no imposition. And government has made it very clear.
Okay,
that
so,
this is a draft
I'll
policy. We are
come to
only
Manu
bringing in
Sundaram.
recommendations.
You
There
know,
is no
Murli-
question of taking in
S.
the
Murli
independent
Dharan,
views
who's
of
a
any minister
pro-AIA
also.
DMK analyst. Murli, the point over here is, again, we've been discussing this issue for a very long time, for almost 4 days now. And the key word over here is imposition, in quotes, imposition. Now, here is a government which is saying that there is no imposition. Here you have the panel chief who's saying on NDTV that there will be no imposition. Then where is the problem? States are free to do what they want. Where is the problem?
Absolutely no. The problem is old school thoughts, Sanket. There is a paradigm shift which has happened. The imposition word should be replaced with the de facto, because all across India you can walk around with Hindi, you can manage, except for Tamil Nadu. I need to bring one thing here. This is a video of Mr. P. Chidambaram speaking when they were in power. He says, I have sent this to your team also, the Hindi should be made the Rashtra Bhasha. Now, DMK is in alliance with Congress. Next thing, today's NEET results. There was so much of halla gulla about NEET, saying that our students in Tamil Nadu do not subscribe to CBSE standards because our state level, board level standards are much lower. Now, this is because the DMK deprived the Tamil Nadu people of the CBSE Navyodaya schools entering inside, which were accepted in other 3 states, Karnataka, Kerala and Andhra. Okay, now we were deprived of this. That's why they were saying NEET, we cannot qualify, we cannot pass. Today, the pass percentage compared to last year has gone up by 9-10%.
No, but then Murli, see, I understand all of this, but see, at least I would say, no, one moment.
Next point is,
Murli, one moment. See, you are taking a radical position. You would want to believe a progressive position, but then you've got the AIA-DMK government which puts out a tweet, a pro-Tamil tweet, that Tamil should be an optional language in other states also. He asked the Honorable Prime Minister to implement this and then immediately deletes it. Why? Do you think that there is essentially a great sense of confusion in the Tamil Nadu government?
I'll tell you.
You are in an alliance.
One thing is, he probably did not, Sanket, he did not want to fuel to this controversy more and more. All he said, he retracted later. But I'll tell you one thing. If people in Maharashtra and Gujarat wants to learn Tamil, why not? It's one of the classical languages.
So who's stopping them?
Most ancient language.
I don't think anyone's stopping them. Manu Sundaram, I'm quickly going to come back to you.
The 3-language policy, nobody's stopping them.
One more.
One minute, Sanket, let me finish this. Then there
I'll
was
come
another video which has surfaced from the same DMK alliance of Mr. Thirumavalavan. The Thirumavalavan's video says, thank God we do not have Hindi in Tamil Nadu, because if we would have had Hindi in Tamil Nadu, Modi's eloquent speeches would have won the hearts of Tamils. And
okay, one moment. Then Manu Sundaram.
Sad and pathetic
okay, one more. Manu Sundaram. Manu Sundaram is smiling. I have to go to him. A lot of this is directed at Manu Sundaram. Manu, your party, the allegation is keeping the people of Tamil Nadu deprived. Because in the name of identity, this politics, this brand of politics works for you.
Well, at least I think I will agree with the concession that this is an identity issue. It is not purely a language issue. And yes, identity matters in politics as much as it does in real life. Now, the allegations against DMK are not fair. I don't think Mr. Muralidharan speaks officially for the ADMK, but nevertheless, you must understand that the 2-language policy has been in Tamil Nadu since 1968. So it's been 51 years, out of which the DMK has been in the state government for 21 years, and the ADMK has been in state government for 30 years. Nevertheless, I don't want to get into an argument with someone who's not an official spokesperson. But look, let me propose a progressive solution, and let me make this to the Prime Minister and the Union Human Resource Development Minister. Why not adopt a 22-language policy? There are 22 languages in the 8th schedule to the Constitution of India. They include Assamese, Urdu, Sindhi, Bengali, Tamil and so on. Why not make them all official languages of the Union? Sanket, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, to know that the European Union Parliament has 28 official languages. Now, if they can run a European Union Parliament with 28 official languages, why can't India, an aspiring superpower under the leadership of the new Prime Minister, or rather the Prime Minister Modi, who's become Prime Minister again, why can't he run the country and its parliament
will you lead a representation
with 22 official languages?
You will now be very strong in parliament.
Why
you will
don't
have
we
a good
add
sizable
dialects
strength
to that?
Will you impress upon the central leadership to do this?
Why don't we add to the 22 languages?
Yes, we have.
Why don't we add 101
we have
dialects
already
also?
introduced a private. We have introduced a
No,
private
one
member
moment.
bill
Vivek
to
wants
the
to go.
effect
Vivek, very quickly,
of
what's your
making
point?
22.
Vivek, what's your point?
Sanket, see, the whole issue is not to bring in 22 languages. I think it's a very absurd argument. Then the question is, why don't you bring 101 dialects also? Already students are burdened in India. I don't think we have to impose the baggages of languages on them. It takes away the core proficiency that they have to inculcate in their schooling. It is not languages that they have to inculcate alone. They have to inculcate other things.
I think we've accommodated all views at this moment.
22 languages, I think it's a very absurd proposition.
Okay. But see, it'll be interesting to have a debate on this in Parliament. Murli, Vivek Reddy as well as Manu Sundaram, thank you very much for debate number 1 right here on Left, Right and Centre. Let's at least have a debate on this issue. Whether 22 languages should be adopted or not, whether they should be taught or not. And think about it. The National Education Policy since 1968 has adopted the 3-language policy. And even now, we're debating whether to have it or not. There's some states, our research team found out, that are yet to implement a 2-language policy. That's the state of education in this country. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on debate number 1